In this video, I will show how to create faux or imitation wax seals. If you're a card maker, you may have all you need to create these beautiful seals for your projects. No need to invest on expensive wax seal paraphernalia. Hi, this is Anna from Crafty Anna Studio. Welcome to my YouTube channel where I post card making and paper crafting tutorials. I will show you how I made these imitation wax seals using embossing powder and stamps. To demonstrate this, I will be using the Hero Arts Wax Seal Stamp and Die Set. This stamp set images are perfectly sized for this technique, but you may shop your stash to find similarly sized stamps as well. Off camera, I die cut some wax seal shapes. You can of course cut these shapes out by hand. I also have here a strip of scrap cardstock. Any length will do as long as it's more than 4 inches long. Also, another piece of scrap cardstock of any size, embossing powder, and embossing or watermark ink. I already placed one of the small stamps on an acrylic block. Make sure you prepare all the materials prior to making these seals. First, I take a strip of cardstock, add temporary adhesive to one end, and then place one of the die-cut pieces. Then I bring in a coffee filter to catch all the embossing powder. I place the strip with the die cut on top of the scrap piece of paper and start applying a generous amount of embossing ink. Next, I sprinkle the surface generously with embossing powder. Here I'm using gold embossing powder. I take the heat tool, which I had already preheated for about 30 seconds, and start by heating the back first before moving to the front. I will be doing about 4 to 5, sometimes 6 layers of embossing for this technique. Then I apply embossing ink once again for the second layer. The more layers I apply, the longer it will take to dry between layers. I will repeat this process a couple of more times to make sure I get an embossing that's very thick. While I wait for the third layer to dry, I will look around for something that would be the right diameter to fit inside the wax seal. I have here a couple of options. One is the cap to one of my glue bottles, and the other is the cap of a small spray bottle. You can look around to see what would be the right fit. I am adding now the fourth layer, but this time I place the die cut directly into the embossing powder. Then I heat it up until it's all melted. You can see how thick the embossing powder has become. Now here comes the tricky part. I blast it once again with the heat gun just to make sure it's still melted. I take the cap and gently place it on top of the wet embossing powder, just for a few seconds. Then I lift it up and you can see it created a circular indentation. Then I blasted it once again right in the middle just for a few seconds, took the stamp and gently placed it on top for just a few seconds as well. But this time I didn't heat up the embossing enough that it didn't create an impression. But that's okay. So what I did was I added more embossing ink, and then I added more of the embossing powder right on top. And then now I'm going to heat set it once again until everything is smooth and melted. So technically this is the 5th layer. I think this is just the right thickness to make a good impression. So I blasted it again, and then I took the cap, created the circular indentation, And then I will blast it once again, but just in the middle. Then take the stamp, then press it gently and lift. And there you go. You have a nice impression of the stamp. And not to worry, it didn't damage the stamp at all. I'm going to show you one more time. But the key to this technique is to make sure that you have enough layers of embossing powder to get the right thickness to make a good impression of the stamp. So for this one, it's a thicker kind of embossing powder, so I think I only used about 4 layers, and it was thick enough to be able to make a nice impression. So you would have to experiment with all the embossing powders you have in your stash. In the interest of time, I'm not showing how I let the embossing powders dry between layers. The third layer was not thick enough, so I will add another layer to make the embossing powder thick enough to make a good impression. In this stamp set, there was a cute little stamp with the word handmade, and I will use this for this particular seal. So here are all the seals I made using the stamp set designs. So I have a couple of snowflakes, and I have one with a deer, and then this one is what I made earlier for the video. Then I also made some seals using silver embossing powder. So I have here a few snowflakes, and then these 2 seals, the Christmas tree and this kind of snowflake, I made with the more solid stamps in the stamp set, which created a more embossed impression instead of a debossed impression. I will be making a clean and simple card using the seals I made. The stamp set I'll be using is this one from Hero Arts called Holiday Flourishes, and I used the biggest floral cluster. I'll be using a Misty stamping platform, and inside I replaced the foam pad with this photopolymer grip mat from Waffle Flower. I placed a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of cherry red cardstock in the middle of the grid. The stamp is already positioned, but first I will apply some anti-static powder on the surface, which in this case is just cornstarch. I apply a generous amount of embossing ink onto the stamp, then close the door of the Misty onto the cardstock and give it a good press in order to transfer the embossing ink onto the surface. Then I repeat one more time, just to be sure I get enough ink for the embossing powder to stick. Next, I sprinkle it with gold embossing powder, then heat set it using a heat tool. Then I will trim the panel down to about a little less than 4 inches by 5 1/4. Then I will gold heat emboss the edges of this panel. I took the embossing ink pad and swiped it on the edges of the panel. Next, I added embossing powder by tapping the edges onto the leftover embossing powder I used from earlier. Then I will heat set it. I hope you found this video inspiring so far. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you're already subscribed, thank you for being here. Next, I took some gold embroidery thread and wound it around 5 to 6 times on the lower half of the panel. I secured it with washi tape at the back. Then I added washi tape in the area where I will place the wax seal. I added dimensional tape at the back of the seal before placing it down onto the cardstock. Then I added some double-sided dimensional tape at the back before adding it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 cherry red base. If you're interested in checking out the products I used in this video, they are all listed in my blog post linked below. I also have a playlist of videos at the end that you may be interested in checking out. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time, bye!